right, so let's start with where you grew up. It's a town called Hope in British Columbia. There's a wide river cutting through a very gorgeous valley. Tell
Wow.
us about Hope, about this place, and what it means to you.
Yeah. So Hope, BC, 3,000 people. Interesting part about how I got there is my father is from Jamaica. My mother is from Canada. And they met on a cruise ship in 1960. And my dad was the only black man in the town. So growing up in an interracial family in the 70s and the 80s in this tiny little blue collar town, but I had the most amazing childhood. Like just, played every sport. Obviously, hockey became my profession for a while, and same with my older brother, who was a referee. Um, but Hope was a wonderful place to grow up. To this day, my mom is still there. My dad passed away in 1995, but they named the aquatic center after my father for all he did in the town. And we still have a lot of roots there, and we give back a variety of ways. And I'm really proud to be from
That is beautiful.
there. Yeah, yeah.
How did
So,
how did but how did they end up there? How did your dad and your mom end up in this small
yeah,
little
my
town?
my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a civil engineer in
Mm,
Vancouver, and
mm,
he was in charge of building the second freeway from Vancouver to Hope, Highway 7. And when my dad came from Jamaica, he didn't have a job. So he started as a laborer on the highway crew. And part of that was building this highway, ended up staying in Hope a few nights. And he applied for a job as the Parks and Recreation Director in charge of the hockey arena and the swimming pool. So here's this guy. My dad was an athlete. He swam and played water polo in the Commonwealth Games. He played for the Jamaican national team. That's where my brother and I got good genetics. And he was like, I think we're going to move here. So he
mm.
quit his job with the highway and started that job. And that was the job he had from 1969 until 1990.
It's beautiful. All right,
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
you alluded to hockey just a minute ago, and you played for the Powell River Paper Kings Junior Hockey League. That is the best name ever. Um,
Yeah.
would love to hear from you just a little bit about your hockey experience. But more importantly, I'm curious of what do you love about that particular sport, and maybe describe what it feels like for you to be on ice.
Yeah, so I played for Powell River. That was junior hockey, and then I went on to play collegiately at University of British Columbia, and then I played a couple of years of professional hockey after. What does hockey mean? I mean, the game to me, it's the ultimate team game because you have five skaters on the ice, a goaltender, everybody has a role. Um, you move faster on skates than you do on feet, so you have to be able to react, and it becomes a game of instinct. It's a very physical game, as evidenced by my fake teeth and all my bruises and bumps. Um, what does it mean to be on the ice? I haven't skated and probably played hockey in probably a decade, um, but there is still no greater feeling, even to this day, than to slap on a pair of skates and I can still move okay when I get out there. It's just like this freewheeling feel. Reminds me of being a kid,
Mm,
just
mm,
shooting a bunch of pucks at 6 o'clock in the morning with the lights off in the arena.
mm. Are any of your children skaters, hockey players, ice skaters?
Our middle daughter was a very good figure skater. The other three, they can barely move around on the ice, believe it or not. Um, but we all watch hockey. That's mandatory in the house. And yeah, hockey was a big part,
Yeah.
has been a big part of my
Mm.
family's history.
All right, so let's jump to the present. You are now the executive chairman and former CEO of Sales Benchmark Index, or I've heard you describe it as SBI.
Yeah,
For our listeners who aren't familiar with the world of B2B or business to business revenue growth consulting, let's
yeah,
say I'm a company who wants to make money. How
yeah,
does SBI help?
yeah. Really simply, we help you sell more stuff. So SBI
Okay,
was
some
founded.
detail, please.
Yeah. So there were three founders that I joined about 2 years into the journey. So I was the first employee. So Greg, Aaron, and Mike were the three co-founders. And the thesis was in 2006 that the CEO could call McKinsey if they needed help on strategy, and the CFO could call EY or Deloitte, and the CMO could call Ogilvy. But who does the sales leader call? Who's that trusted advisor to help you understand who should you target? Should you use inside sales or outside sales? Do you need hunters or farmers? How do you pay your salespeople? How do you set quotas properly? How do you attract the right talent? All of the components, Whitney, of leading a complex B2B sales organization, there wasn't really anybody who woke up every day doing that. So we decided that we were going to serve the revenue leader. And then that evolved over time because really every CEO has to grow. So now SBI, 16 and a half years later, is really the trusted advisor for CEOs and private equity and the chief commercial officer in enterprise companies, helping them figure out how to grow organically.
Do you remember when you first realized that you could sell?
I do. It was probably fundraising as a 9-year-old in Hope for hockey tournaments and going door to door. And this thing called the skate-a-thon, which was how many laps around the arena could you do in 1 hour? And I would get pledges either by the lap or just a set donation. So I would go door to door. I'd knock on people's door. Hi, I'm Matthew Sharrers. I'm raising money. Obviously a small town, and a lot of people knew who my dad was. But I really liked knocking on the door and having people either say, oh, I'm not interested. And I'd be like, really? Come on. I think I started handling objections as a 9-year-old. And I loved the measurability of it. I was fascinated by looking at a street saying there are 10 houses on the street. I wonder if I can go 10 for 10. If I can't go 10 for 10 on this street, I'll go to the next street. Maybe I can go 10 for. It was a way to compete. I love to compete. I still do. I don't compete in selling anymore, but I compete in other things.
All right. So let's go into the weeds for a minute on the selling piece before we go to the next part. So I'm curious. I've heard you talk about a commercial model. And I'm going to refresh your memory in case you're like, what is she talking about? That there's a person that opens doors, generates demand, gets the first meeting. The introductory conversation person moves to a statement of work, and a person that can deliver the project. Few people can do all three. Will you just talk a little bit about that model and how, as you're aware of that, what that looks like inside of an organization when you're consulting them?
Yeah. You know, Whitney, one of the things that SBI to this day, as complex as business has become, selling still can be simplified, right? To the point where you can really break it down into what I call 3 motions, right? Like somebody has to be able to generate a meeting to gauge interest, whether it's a business development rep or sales development rep or lead development rep, whatever type of DR you have, or if it's in consulting, if you work at McKinsey or Bain or SBI or Disruption Advisor, like someone's got to get a meeting. On that meeting, you've got to gauge some level of interest, and someone has to say, "Oh, I think I'm interested." So I kind of think about that as like that first motion. From there, you need to kind of shape a scope of work. Whether it is I'm selling a piece of software that's going to help with customer success retention, like what's the problem they're really having? How does my solution or product match and help solve that? And then if I happen to have them go, oh, I really want to do this, how do we actually deliver the service in consulting or deliver the product in my software example that they not only become a customer, but they have a great experience. You know, and software companies want perpetual relationships. A lot of consulting companies want to have a client for life, right? That's the term. So everybody still has to think about the delivery of said product or service. And does that create retention and advocacy from a customer? Those are the 3 motions.
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting is, or where I have a curiosity is, you know, you get a lot of people who are good. They go in, they do great delivery. and they have an opportunity to sell. How do you coach them? Because I think that's oftentimes something that just really, like, there's huge upside that gets left on the table. How do you
There
coach
is.
that particular individual?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways, Whitney. I mean, this is an age-old challenge. There are, especially in professional services, people who typically like to deliver the service or solve the problem don't necessarily like to initiate a new conversation to say, hey, Whitney, we've had a 16-week relationship. You hired us to do this. I've observed a couple of other things. I've got a point of view where I think we can help you.
Mm.
I wanted to bring you a couple of ideas and see if you'd be interested in them. That's a very unnatural thing
Yeah.
for somebody who just likes to deliver.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways to solve it, right? One is you can just keep beating on that person saying, hey, go do this, which doesn't feel very good because we all like to play to our strengths.
Mhm.
The other thing is you can recognize how in that sort of customer journey is the right time to still have somebody involved who can initiate that conversation and help that person who just likes to deliver the work. So for
Mm.
many of your listeners, they would be familiar with a professional services model where you probably have a partner on an engagement who's like the overall leader of that said project. Or you probably have an engagement manager or a delivery leader or director who delivers the work. They're a two-person team. And there's a little bit of help they give each other in that lane, but that partner's job is probably sell the next engagement,
Mhm.
grow the asset. The director or the engagement manager's job is deliver the work, create a super happy client who makes it their idea, and there's no selling involved.
Mm.
I just pick up the phone and go, hey, Whitney, I got a question for you. Can you guys help us with this? Do you do that? So part of it is how do you deliver an experience that has the client say, I don't want you to leave the building because you're adding something valuable.
I like that. A metric. Does the client want you to leave the building or not?
Yeah,
That's a good
that's right.
metric. All right,
Did they set up an office for you?
one other detailed question. Oftentimes we hear in SaaS businesses the rule of 40, but you've coined the rule of 55.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that rule.
Yeah, so that's a metric that I use, in my work now. And Whitney, you and I sit on a board together of a wonderful professional services firm, Embark. Um, and it's a metric that measures growth rate and EBITDA margins that equal 55. So if I'm a rule of 55 business, I might be growing 25% a year and I have 30% margins. Or I could be growing 35% a year. I'm high growth and I have 20% margins. But being a top decile professional services firm, you're able to operate above that 55 margin. And
Mm.
I know that just from the time I spent building and having gone through a couple of transactions with SBI, but also now the work I do sitting on a few boards that are professional services firms to really help that. Anything more than that growth rate in a people business, it's tough to keep up with the hiring and the quality,
Mm,
right?
mm,
You and I have had many conversations about that.
mm.
And you also have to have enough margin that you can, return capital to shareholders. Because once you take private equity investment, when all things are equal, you've got to deliver a return on invested capital. And that's the way it
Yes,
goes.
you do. Okay, love it. All right, so let's go back. So SBI, we just talked about what you did. That was your bread and butter for a number of years.
Yeah.
How did you know when you were in, to use our parlance, at the top of the S curve in mastery? How did you know it was time for you to move on?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I wasn't enjoying the work
Mhm.
of being the CEO as much as I should have been. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is I love the early days of a business. I love hard right turns, hard left turns. I don't like detail at all. I don't like people issues at all. I don't like noise in the system. Like, that's just not me. And as the firm grew, which was wonderful, and as we got more complex and you, you don't know every employee, it just started to become one of those things for me and where I play to my strengths, where I was probably not going to be doing a great service to the firm. So that was one.
Mm-hmm.
Two was when we did our second transaction, Whitney, I was 46 or 47, not 47 at the time. And I always had in my mind that at 50, I would have freedom of time relative to choose where I spend it. So it was less about when I get to X dollars, it was more about can I still be young enough and healthy enough to enjoy my life with my wife when
Mm-hmm.
our children are out of the house, which they are now, and be able to have freedom of time. And I think a lot of people end up having freedom of money earlier than they have freedom of time, and they regret not using the time more wisely. I'm
Mm-hmm.
51 now, and I probably have less time than I do money relative to the next 15 or 20 years because father time eventually catches up. We're not all as healthy as we want to be, and there were just other things I wanted to experience because I
Mm-hmm.
was very siloed building SBI. It was SBI and then whatever else I could fit in, including my family. And I can own that. Then there were things I missed out on in the formative years, being a CEO, traveling all over the place, not being home during the week, and I wasn't going to do that in my 50s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so speaking of health and father time, you get up at 4 a.m. every day, don't you?
I do. I do. I
Talk to us
love.
about your morning routine and how you are making sure you beat back father time. What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little this will probably be a little freakish for people, but I do get up actually 10 to 4 every day,
Mhm.
except for the weekends I probably wake up around 5. Um and I meditate for 10 minutes and I do a daily journal and then I'm in the gym and I pray and then I'm in the gym by 5 and I work out from 5 to 6:30 and then, sort of wind down and I'm usually at my desk doing something productive by 7:15. But that window of meditation, prayer, gratitude journaling, I started that in the CEO seat because I had to find a place to center my own mind and
Mhm.
to have that time. Because when you're a CEO, and when you know this because you're in the seat, your time is not your own and you have to serve your team.
Mhm.
So you can't get upset when it's not your own, but it isn't your own. And Eve, you can have the best EA, which I had a wonderful assistant. You can do the best calendar management, but you have lender calls, board calls, uh, ELT meetings, skip level meetings, planning. There's just one after the other after the other. And if you don't harness and protect your calendar to have that time, the rest of the time you're not productive. Now in a coaching role with multiple CEOs, I want to show up and really ready to serve them. And that's why I still do that.
Mhm.
It gets my day started.
Mm. So good, and I love your discipline. And I'm assuming that this discipline started at a very young age, right? I mean, because
Yeah,
of your sports. Yeah. I mean,
it
you
did.
didn't magically become disciplined at the age of
No,
42. Yeah. Okay.
no, no.
Okay. All right. So you have a book out called The Second CEO. It is all about the person who takes over for that original founder CEO figure. It's about,
Yeah.
and I know you're Canadian, but I'm going to use this example anyway, about the John Adams perspective, having to follow George Washington. So tell us about your own experience as a second CEO.
Yeah. Well, and also, Whitney, I'm an American citizen now too, so I've got two
Ooh,
passports. So
ooh,
I'm
okay.
in.
All
I'm
right.
in.
You know what I'm talking about then.
Yeah. Um. So the impetus to write the book was really simple. It was I wanted to write the book that in 2016 I was looking to buy to help me figure out how to be a good successor to Greg.
Mm,
So Greg was our co-founder and the first CEO of SBI for a decade, just over a decade. And when he decided he wanted to leave and do something else, and the partners, we all sat down. There were 6 of us at the time, and the team was supportive of me taking the reins. And I was doing a lot of the kind of number 2 work, if you will, in the
mm,
firm. Um, but there were so many things I just didn't understand and appreciate. But also, I had my own imposter syndrome. So as my career moved on in the CEO seat, as I started doing board work and helping other CEOs, I try to use a lot of structured thinking and methodology because if you're a good hockey coach my dad was my swimming coach, there's a process to being a great coach. Well, if I'm going to be a great coach as a CEO, I've got to have a methodology. And it's not about, I wrote the book because I wanted to be famous. Quite the opposite. I wrote the book because I wanted to be able to help other second CEOs not make a bunch of the mistakes that I made. Did a couple things right. And I also wanted to share that. And I learned how to go from being, a super commercial person to actually being a business person
Mm.
and being an executive.
Mm.
So that was my impetus to writing it. And because there were like 1,000 books on how to be a CEO and 1,000 on how to start a company, nobody had threaded the needle about how to follow a founder.
So tell me one thing that you really struggled with, and one thing that you actually did really well that you were prepared to do because of your background prior to that.
Um, if there's only one thing I struggled with, because there were lots, but if
Well, you can do
the
two
big
if you
one,
want. Yeah.
yeah, the big one I struggled with out of the gates was, how should I spend my time?
Hmm.
Like, I knew how to spend my time as the senior partner because I was in charge of revenue. So it was every minute of every day I should be on a business development call or helping the partners expand their footprint in an account. It was so easy to think about that. But as the CEO, I was like, well, how much time do I need to spend in finance? And what do I need to be doing relative to our intellectual property? Should I be spending time in marketing? Like, what's my role? That was a big one. And then the second one was guiding the firm strategically. Where do we play? How do we win? And then probably the third one was the team.
Hmm.
How did I go from a Greg-led SBI with a Greg team to a Matt-led SBI and a Matt team? And I made a mess in the first year trying to be a derivative of Greg
Hmm.
instead of trying to be the best version of Matt. Greg thinks differently, operates differently. We're all different people. It'd be no different than, Whitney, you and I work
Mhm.
with Paul and Bark. Paul's so different from Clancy,
Mhm.
right? They're both highly effective CEOs, but a Clancy-led Embark is so different than a Paul-led Embark
Mhm.
because of the human that's actually doing the leading. And I
Mhm.
didn't have enough appreciation for what that looked like at a future back level. I
Yeah.
was too busy thinking present forward.
So, um, I'm gonna push on you for just a second because I think there's an interesting. I'm having an interesting cognitive dissonance for myself. So, in my interactions with you, and now this is what 8 years ago, but in my interactions with you, you exude confidence. I would argue, you even have a bit of swagger, and I mean that as a compliment.
Right.
So, it's curious to me, how did, in that moment where you said you felt like an imposter and you were struggling, for people that know you, what were some of your tells that this was a real challenge for you?
Yeah. You're right, and I can own it. I do exude confidence. That's probably back to my athletic days where
Mhm.
you're like, I got to believe in myself because if I don't, like someone's going to take my job, and
Mhm.
and that just stayed with me. And also even as a salesperson, the tells were when I feel like something's not working well, I try to grab more control. I try
Mm.
to like exude and push my will. So instead of being curious and asking questions, I leap to conclusions with limited data and have a lot of exclamation marks. Telling people what to do, yes,
Yeah.
instead of
Okay.
saying, hey, help me understand.
Mm.
So, me putting my nose and having to have my hands on things. So, instead of leading first, doing second, I was doing first, pushing first, and not working through the team.
Mm.
And it took me, a year to really figure that out. And the combination of having an amazing coach, a couple of great people on the team who would shoot me straight, our co-founder Aaron Bartels, who's a total introvert, analytical, methodical thinker, is just like, dude, what are you doing? Like, just be you
Mm.
Don't be this different version. And it
Mhm.
was like that combination unlocked it. And then all of a sudden in year 2, things just started to work.
Mm.
And I really started to enjoy the job.
So it was really so we know the tell, take more control, but the way through for you was to be willing and humble enough to get coached by a number of different stakeholders, um, and to be willing to adapt.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so for besides reading your book, for people who are the second CEO or anybody who comes into a new role, a new manager, where there has been a highly effective leader, regardless of the level, what are one or two suggestions that you would make to that second up at bat?
Yeah. Yeah. The first one is in your first, 90, 100 days in the role, even if you're an insider and you got promoted up, act like an outsider.
Mm.
5 questions to 1 statement. Resist the urge to force your will and show how smart you are.
Mm.
Right. And while everyone is looking for you to make change, what do you think? And what do you think? Right. Be deliberate and exude this level of strategic patience to just say, hey, tell me a little more about that.
Mm.
Why do we do it like that?
Mm.
Why do you think we put that in place? And if you could do anything in your function right now that we're not doing, what would that be? And what do you think the implications of that decision would be for the business? And just listen, because the answers are usually sitting there. And if you're a strong command person and you have a high action orientation, which I do, have enough self awareness to recognize your blind spot is to leap and be vulnerable enough to go, hey, listen, just so everybody knows, this is me. So when I do this, please punch me in the metaphorical face
Yep.
and tell me to slow my roll.
Mm-hmm.
And Whitney, one of the things I did, I hired GH Smart to do a full leadership assessment on me about 4 months into the CEO seat. And I got the results. And I mean, for anybody who hasn't been through a GH Smart assessment, like they know what color bicycle you had when you were 5. They know everything, good and bad. And
Yep.
so what I did as a sign of openness, I took the results and I posted them internally for the entire company to read.
Mm.
And I
Wow.
said, this is
Wow.
me. These
How
are
did
my
that
strengths.
feel? How did that
You
feel
can,
when you did that?
it actually felt amazing because here's the thing. Most people know it anyways. So
Yeah.
quit telling yourself this false narrative,
Mhm.
right? So behind my energy and bravado and nice suits is a guy who's super competitive, hates to lose, has a tendency to pick fights, leap to conclusions, not dig into data, and always think he's right. It's like, this is who I am. I'm working on it. But by me being vulnerable, well, guess what? Disclosure creates disclosure. So now the firm can go, well, this is our leader and he's telling us all these issues and stuff he has. I can bring my whole self to work and I can say what I struggle. It's not perfect, but that was my way of saying, hey, man, I'm taking off the mask of composure. This is me, good, bad, and
Mm.
ugly. You don't have to do anything with it. Just FYI.
Game changer.
So, yeah, it was for me. And I think people saw a different version. Like if you talk to some of my partners who were in the seat, there was a different version, the kind of back half of my tenure as a
Mhm.
CEO, especially when we sold the company the second time and having to have the level of conversations we did and knowing that I'd been in the seat for a couple of years and really hardened the strategy. Yeah, it was good. And it
Mm.
was a very evolutionary time in my professional development.
Mm. So one other question on that is how do you or what advice would you give to people to sort of walk that line between acknowledging the past and
Yeah.
then putting your own stamp on the company so that you're able to move forward, but you're not,
Yeah.
hey, Greg, Greg was bad. I'm good. Like, what does that
Yep.
look like for you? What advice do you give people?
Yeah. Acknowledge and appreciate the beautiful cultural norms and what got you to this point.
Mm.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, very often people make the mistake when they follow a founder of sort of looking at certain cultural things or things that happen in the business and saying, we're going to do it differently, versus going, hey, in 5 years, if the CEO of this business is effective, how will they have created shareholder value?
Hmm.
And come up with those three, no more than three kind of big value creation levers, and then work backwards from there to where you are. The reason to do that is it kind of takes the emotional component
Hmm.
out, and it allows you to go, boy, I drive value here by number one, identifying the proper acquisitions for us to make, because we're in a highly fragmented business and we can buy businesses at 5 times EBITDA and with a larger platform, sell them at 11. And that's 6 turns of value creation I can't get anywhere else. Number two, I've got to launch a new product because of X. Number three, I've got to fix the commercial engine, blah, blah, blah. But it kind of takes this very, what I would call almost sanitary approach to
Hmm.
what needs to be done, and writing that scorecard for yourself. That's your job to be done, as opposed to, let me put my stamp and let me change this and let me change that. And I didn't believe in this tradition. Sometimes that's ego,
Hmm.
right? As
Yeah, yeah.
opposed to the role of the job.
Yeah. So it's like, what is the future of this company need to look like? And from a discounted cash flow, almost present value, what needs to be happening today? And so it becomes almost an
100%.
equation to create value. All
100%.
right. I'm wondering, we're talking a lot about the second CEO being successful. What have you found? What did you observe that the founder did or can do to set up the second CEO for success? What are some
Yeah.
things that can impede that, and what are some things that they can do that there's some patterns there of success happening?
Yeah. So, number one, if they're still around the business, either sitting on the board or maybe they take a partial operating role, but they don't want to be the CEO, get out of the way and get out of the team's way.
Hmm.
It's one thing to say, hey, I'm not the CEO anymore. You better call, so and so. It's another thing to still be around the metaphorical water cooler, listening to the noise in the system, having people from the old guard come to you and be like, hey, I'm not sure why, Sarah's making these changes. Did you know that she did this? And then as the founder, right, you're coming over the top going, oh, no, 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 we're not going to do that. I'm still on the board. That'll never happen.
Hmm.
You're cutting the legs out from the current leader.
Mm-hmm.
That would have driven you crazy when you were the CEO.
Yeah.
And recognize that the founder you were and the CEO you were two different people. This one started the company. This one ran the company. The person who ran the company would have never tolerated or wanted somebody doing that. So don't do it to the current person. Just don't. Number two, recognize that the way that person leads is going to be different than you, and allow them to do that.
Hmm.
Don't expect them to be a derivative of you. I had an advantage, Whitney. My advantage was Greg left SBI,
Mm.
right? He sold his equity back. We got somebody to help us buy it because it was expensive, and he was gone. So I wasn't working in the shadow of him. In a lot of founder situations, whether it's a private equity buyout, they don't want the founder to totally leave. They need that continuity. They want them to roll some equity. Because they roll equity, they're personally vested. They're like, man, I got to make sure my
Mm-hmm.
money is in good hands, and they have a hard time relinquishing control.
Mm.
So, without doubt, that would be my
Mm.
advice,
Mm.
and it's
Okay.
really hard.
Well, yeah, because it's your baby.
Yeah, I live it. I'm still the chairman of SBI. I rolled a significant amount of money because I believed in the thesis of the firm,
Mm-hmm.
and I make mistakes still and get in Mike's way. But Mike and I work really hard to keep me in my lane. I've got a scorecard. He asked me to do specific things as the chairman, running our
Mm.
board, doing certain things with M&A, talking to potential new hires, doing a little coaching, and I open a few doors. That's it.
You know what's interesting about that, Matt, is that because of the work that you're doing now, where you're working with second CEOs, maybe mostly second CEOs, you're working with boards, because you're still in that in that place of being a chairman, you're still in the laboratory, you're still having the experience, so it's keeping you sharp and not out
Yeah.
of touch. Like, I remember back when. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm actually living this right now.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
was in a conversation yesterday with a founder about this very thing.
Hmm.
And some of it was me empathizing and providing some feedback. And some of it was relating, going, listen, I get it, because I struggle with that very thing. When
Mm-hmm.
you think that the CEO isn't doing what needs to be done the way you would do it, and you just want to go get out of the way. Let's Can't do it. It hurts yourself, it hurts them, it hurts the company.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've talked about the challenges of becoming a second CEO. Are there any unique benefits to this in your mind and your experience?
Yeah. To me, I think it is an amazing responsibility and a privilege, because nothing happens without founders. So if you think about yourself as this bridge, right? From founder led, the culture revolves around the founder. There's just all this orbit of professionalizing, systematizing, putting a structure in place that bridge can be crossed for an era of following CEOs, CEO3 through whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an incredible responsibility and a privilege to do it. Um, and to me, it takes somebody unique to be able to appreciate all those cultural nuances of the founder, understand it. And it's funny, when in writing the book, I interviewed so many people who have been multiple second CEOs. This is what they do. They
Huh.
take a they take a baton from a founder, and they're the scaler. They know how to professionalize. They got pattern recognition, and it was amazing. And I
Hmm.
mean, I had a hunch when I started thinking about the book, but typically these things unfold as you do them.
Yeah. Okay, I just have a final, I'm editorializing for a second. Final few questions I want to ask you about your philanthropy. Is there anything else you want me to ask you about the book? I really wanted this to be a teaser for people to go buy it, but I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
there's anything else.
No,
Okay.
you nailed it. You nailed
Okay,
it.
great. All right. So philanthropy. You and your wife sponsor elite athletes in their journey to be the best. Athletes can actually find themselves as a sort of second CEO to themselves in a way. So, what does this look like? Give us an example.
Yeah. So we are so passionate about helping that group, that cohort of people. It comes from a couple things. One, having the honor and the, I guess, the joy of being in my late teens, early 20s, going all in on hockey and pursuing it, and getting to a level where I know what it takes to become a professional athlete, regardless of the sport. Sacrifice, discipline, train, like so many of the habits that when you leave a sport allow you to thrive in other venues.
Mhm.
However, sometimes you need a little nudge along the way. You need a little bit of help, because when you're on the way to becoming a professional, you're not making a lot of money, but you still need to train as if you're a full time NHL, NBA, UFC, whatever the case may be. So it was something, and it's my wife's amazing idea. It has nothing to do with me. This was something she came up with, and we share this passion. And she came home one day and said, "Hey, what do you think?" I'm like, "I'm in."
So, what does
So
that look like? Yeah, what does it look like?
yeah, yeah. So we've got a series of mixed martial artists that we sponsor. Everything from the extra training they need, massage, kick pads, equipment, flights to a camp, etc. That we help them with. We also sponsor up and coming officials. My brother is a former NHL referee. He runs a camp in the summertime, so I help support some folks and to allow them to do that. We give back to my town, Hope, British Columbia, to the summer swim program that my dad started. That helps create people who end up being lifeguards and doing summer jobs. My dad was really passionate about that. We've got an Olympic wrestler, someone who's training to become that, and then hopefully to be in the Olympics in 28. So it's a variety of sports. It's more about the person and how we meet them and what we learn about them than it is about, hey, we only do hockey or we only do this. It's like, hey, tell us about your journey. What do you need? What are you looking for? And then my wife's got a deep passion for the UFC. If you looked at her, you'd be like, that woman doesn't want to be hit, but she just loves the sport. So we do a lot with mixed martial arts.
All right. So here you are. You're young. You said you're 50 years old. Is that right? You just turned
51.
51. You get up every day, work out spiritually, physically. You're doing what you need to do to stay in good health. You're going to be statistically on this planet for another 20, 30, maybe 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to get done over the next couple of years? What's important to you?
Yeah. So I'm working on something right now that I'm not going to share, but the XY axis of my life is joy and impact. So when I think about a new venture, when I think about serving on a board, when I think about doing anything, I look at it through those two lenses. Is this going to be something that's high joy?
Mm-hmm.
And is this going to be something that's high impact? And if it's not in the upper right, I don't do it. And I'm blessed that I've got some optionality and the freedom to choose on certain things I do. First part of my life was definitely about having personal success and, quote, all in on that. Second half of my life is going to be all in on others, right? From my wife to helping my children get on their career journey, and maybe if I can open one or two doors to give them a nudge, to helping young athletes, and then really just helping others find their purpose and find their potential. And that's some of the work I'm doing now in my coaching business that I just love, truly. And I don't love it because it's got a bunch of financial rewards. I love it because it's high joy and high impact.
So good. So Matt, what was useful for you in this conversation?
You brought me back to where I grew up. You brought me back to like what shaped me in this very small, simple, slow-paced town. To this day, I was in Hope 4 weeks ago, and life just moves slower there. Nobody ever asked me that. So I love that because it like still generated some emotion. So that was cool. And I love how deliberate you are and intentional you are with your conversations and the questions you ask. But knowing you as I have gotten to over these last few years, that doesn't surprise me because intentionality is who you are.
Thank you. All right. So let's put a bow on this conversation. Final thoughts, closing thoughts.
There's a lot of people that I interact with, whether in business or just along the way, that for some reason aren't living their best life because they're gripped with fear. So if nothing else, I would tell people, from whether it's my athletic pursuits that still ended in a very short professional career where, quote, I didn't get what I wanted, to a Fortune 500 career, I ended up getting divorced, getting remarried. I mean, I've seen it. I've had all the adversity. You got to keep believing that you can evolve and that you deserve to live your best life. So go seek joy and go seek impact. However you describe that in your life. Don't settle and say, I'm, quote, living the dream, but you say it sarcastically and you give yourself a hall pass. Actually look in the mirror and say, I'm willing to go do something about it.
Matt, thank you. It's been a delight.
Thank you.